I always want to just stress just how fractured the Tory party really is when it comes to many different things. Like ideologically, they are split across so many different factions. It's sort of really difficult and how to tell. You've got one nation conservatives, you've got free market fundamentalists, you've got right wing libertarians, you've got um people who sort of want a sort of big state but don't want to expand it any further. There's so many different types and ideologies going on in the Tory party that they just cannot agree on getting on. And we always said at the 2019 general election, yes, they may have won this massive majority, but can Boris Johnson hold it together? And we always said Boris was holding it together very threadbare. And even at that point, if he had stayed, those threads were starting to thin very quickly. Even if Liz Truss had somehow managed to survive, she wouldn't have been able to keep them together either. So it is now left up to Sunak, who has shown time and time again he is a weak prime minister. He cannot keep his party together. There is no party cohesion. And even more interestingly, as we've said before, green issues are becoming the order of rebellion today. A lot of people on the right of the Tory party have set out their mass objection to net zero, saying that this is the new Brexit issue. This is what they want, with even Nigel Farage joining in, saying there should be a sort of referendum on net zero. And of course, Steve Baker's now infamous net zero scrutiny group trying to scupper any new green idea or proposal that there is. We already saw this with the unbanning of onshore wind farms. In order to get that to pass, Sunak had to give these rebels a coal mine in Cumbria. And as a result, rebellions are now the baked-in factor to this current government. And it just goes to show you how much policy today, how badly our policy suffers over this because of the warring of these internal factions, because they cannot even get a single story straight about what they want to do. The government says that, oh yes, we're going to be all in favor of building this new green economy. Meanwhile, every single chance that they get, MPs are taking every single opportunity to undermine anything that they might actually try and do to try and follow that agenda. And this is yet another big fault line that has split the Conservative Party, because if you look at people's voting intentions, green environmental affairs has very quickly, rapidly shot up people's, concern for votings at the next general election. Remember, in Australia, the Conservative Party said very clearly, we lost that general election because we were not paying attention to green issues. And it is now something that is rapidly changing within the Conservative Party of Australia, having to actually recognise these green issues and having their own civil war at the moment in Australia over those exact things. Something which we are going to see absolutely. Well, we are seeing it today, but we are certainly going to see these sort of flare open into full-scale conflicts after the next general election, certainly after the next general election loss, because, oh boy, are they going to be, it's going to be blame central. It will be blame Sunak for this or blame them for this, and it's going to be very tasty when that happens. But anyway, as always, we're going to go get into this as well to show you more internal warring on the Tory party over green policies and, of course, net zero. So before we go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And, of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And, as always, thank you very much for watching. And, of course, on with the show. So this we go over to The Guardian with the title of Hasty Changes to Sunak's Climate Strategy Reveal a Warring Tory Party. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, headed to Oxfordshire on Thursday to visit a development facility for nuclear fission. The early-stage concept that promises unlimited clean energy at an unspecified future point, if only some hefty physical constraints can be overcome. He was accompanied by Grant Shapps, the Energy and Net Zero Secretary, for the biggest energy and climate change announcement of his premiership. A comprehensive package of measures that were encompassing everything from onshore wind and solar to carbon taxes and heat pumps, saying, when global energy supplies are disrupted and weaponized by the likes of Putin, we have seen household bills soar and economic growth slow around the world, said Sunak. Of the Powering Up Britain, the energy package, we have stepped in to shield people from its worst impacts by helping to pay around half the typical energy bill. But we are also stepping up to try and power Britain to ensure that our energy security in the long term with more affordable clean energy for Britain so we can drive down energy prices and grow our economy. But here's the thing. We would still be probably facing an energy crisis. I think it's debatable of how much an energy crisis we would be facing. If you go all the way back to the start of the Cameron administration, where he also faced his own rebellion over the banning of onshore wind farms. If Cameron hadn't committed to that ban, we would have a lot of onshore wind farms, which would potentially mean maybe we wouldn't be in as a bad position with this energy crisis as we are now. This whole energy crisis and the sudden push to building these facilities is a mistake of the Conservatives' own making. And remember, the people who pushed for that ban are the exact same people trying to scupper the plans now. And trust me, we'll get to this in a point. So, yet, only a few days before, the plan was to hold a launch in Aberdeen, the oil and gas capital of the UK, and local businesses had been primed. Oil and gas specialists were ready, showing their minor interests in green alternatives such as hydrogen, hastily now to the fore, and even for an event to be hailed as the Energy Security Day. Fossil fuels would be a necessary part of the energy security they had been assured. And only a few days before that, the plan was to foreground energy not to foreground energy security at all. The event was to be called the Green Day, and the focus would be clearly on renewable energy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and tackling the climate crisis, as well as bringing down household bills through supporting clean power. So here you can see the vastly hastily changed plan of this. You can just see they knew the impact this would have on the announcements of this, that this wasn't just going to be an announcement sort of targeting the general public that they had to try and please and appease to some way. This was almost going to be an announcement to try and appease their own internal factions in the Tory party. And you can see just how quickly those plans have now changed from one thing to another to back to something else. So, Tom Burke, the co-founder of the think tank E3G, and a veteran government advisor, said the whirl of changes in the run-up to the launch were both bewildering and revealing, saying this is a level of chaos that reveals the extent of the internal, unresolved disputes within the party over these issues, he said. There is an anti-green faction in the Tory party, and this chaos has all been about them. The energy strategy, running to well over 1,000 pages across it, reams of documents, covers everything from nuclear fusion, which some experts regard as a very unconvincing distraction when technology to cut emissions today should be prioritized, to electric vehicle charging points. Yet, Sunak had little choice but to publish some form of strategy this week, as last week the High Court ruled that the government's existing strategy to meet its legally binding target on net zero emissions by 2050 was inadequate. So this is purely desperation from Sunak, and again, he's trying to please the anti-green faction in his party. And as was said, there are unresolved issues over this, but they should be paying attention to what the Australian Conservative Party said when they lost their last election in a very big way. They said specifically, we lost it because we were not paying attention to green issues. We were not paying attention to environmental issues. And yet now we have yet another big factional war. You've got the anti-green Tories and the green Tories fighting against each other. And we already talked about these green Tories should try and form their own faction to push back against the anti-greens. Will they or won't they? Well, we don't know, but we'll have to see. But they absolutely should. So Sunak had little choice. Oh no, we've already gone that. Yeah, so inadequate. So the judge in that case was brought was brought forward by Friends of the Earth and other campaigners in order to try and revamp by the end of this month. Also, the deadline for the government to publish its response to the review of Net Zero by Tory MP Chris Skidmore was published in January. To complete the package, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, decided to publish his strategy for green investment at the same time, setting out how private sector is expected to try and fund the comprehensive overhaul of the UK's economy needed to reach the net zero target. So this is why this is dumb. This is why it won't work. The Tory belief in the private sector can do everything and anything far better than we can has been proved time and time again to be false. Ultimately, what's going to happen is all this net zero money is probably going to go into private companies and they will build something, but it won't be enough because, as has been shown time and time again, you need a government arm to this. There needs to be a government, led, focused, and initiative. You cannot just leave it all to the private companies because, as history has repeatedly shown, they will just not do what they intend to do with that cash. So, for the government, this marks a major cross-Whitehall operation, encompassing the policy that spans the Department of Transport, the Department for Levelling Up, the Department for Business and Trade, and the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, as well as the Treasury and Department for Energy Security and Net Zero and Downing Street. So, a lot of departments. So, the focus is timely, given the rapidly growing concerns that the UK is falling behind internationally, which had been given new urgency by the war in Ukraine and the soaring price of energy, and the US pushing forward strongly with its £369 billion Inflation Reduction Act, which aims to make America a superpower for clean energy technologies and offers tax breaks to manufacturers. Europe, after its initial outrage that it was losing its green leadership status, is now hard at work on a response. Hundreds of billions of euros of investment are now at stake, and the sacred cow of state aid rules is likely to be slaughtered in pursuing them. So, the key question is, does the UK's new energy and climate package measure up to what other countries are planning? I can already tell you the answer. It's going to be no. It's going to be no straight away. So, for most experts and campaigners delivering their verdict on Thursday, the answer was a clear no. Mel Evans, the head of climate at Greenpeace UK, summed it up, saying, "Ministers talk about leading the world, but the UK is not even making it to the starting block on the green tech race. A good government would go all in on renewable energy to give millions of pounds of people to warm their homes, clean air, lower their bills, and a safer climate. By powering up Britain, it is a far cry from what this country needs." Despite the support for offshore wind, the talks of electric vehicles, and the focus on carbon capture, there were too many misses. Plans to insulate over 300,000 homes were dismissed as puny compared with the 14 million that needed the upgrades. Onshore wind turbines are still, in effect, banned, despite the small changes to the planning rules. Hydrogen is still being touted for home heating, despite studies showing it will not work. Solar panels will not be mandated on new house buildings, and of course the heat pump scheme is still flawed. So Burke laid the blame at the door of the Prime Minister, besieged by his own warring party, saying This feels like a party that is internally divided. They cannot come up with a coherent story. They cannot even agree on what that story is. He told The Guardian, and this is what is spooking investors. This anti-green faction of losers who are going to turn the UK into a loser in the global race for green prosperity. And I think that really sums it up. The fact that Sunak is meant to be, talking big about having all this big green in energy investment. And remember, this whole idea is meant to be private company led, that it's, the private sector that will drive the UK's transformation into this wonderful new green energy market. But you've just had it said right at the end there. All these promises, onshore and offshore wind farms still pretty much effectively banned because of planning regulations. You've got a scheme for using the heat pumps, which have said it's not going to work. Home insulation, 300,000 versus the vast millions that really need those desperate upgrades. Still, no mandating solar power panels on new house buildings or on new buildings. They are exactly right. Why is this private sector-led initiative going to invest in green energy where you have this anti-green faction which is making Britain a massive loser in this green sector race? This is something that needs to be, I think, brought to a head. And the question is, what's going to bring it to a head? I think it will be a general election loss. I really think it will. And with Labour and their plans for, again, to create a new green sort of investment, and sort of Rachel Reeves, who will be the greenest chancellor we have ever had, bringing forward a lot of green strategy and green investments, and even a green industrial strategy. Now, I've said before, part of that needs to be the decarbonisation of the British steel industry. A big part of that needs to be in there, but unfortunately hasn't been said. But it would be a massive, massive win if Starmer really did that. But hey, like I say, I am pretty happy with a lot of the other stuff they've been sort of announcing and sort of saying about what they would do in and around this. And it's certainly a lot better than what the Tories are offering. Now, of course, they need to deliver that. But I think that we've now actually got that that push, that drive for it. And the fact that the Tories can't deliver is going to be very telling. Because remember, this happened before at the start of the Cameron administration. Oh, yes, we're going to rapidly invest in all this new green technology. Well, in comes those anti-green Tories and basically shuts down the whole thing. And as we said, if Cameron had seen them off, if they had just ignored them and gone ahead with it, doing what they've done, chances are we might still be in some sort of an energy crisis, but we probably would not be in as bad a state as we are. And bear in mind, if that's what happened last time, that they completely killed all these green initiatives, what do you think the chances are of the Tories actually going ahead and passing any or doing anything on these new green initiatives? History says they will do nothing. And ultimately, that will cost them at the next general election. So, once again, they are not heeding the calls of what happened to the Australian Conservatives, who plainly said, we lost that general election because we ignored, we were too obsessed with climate skepticism. We did not invest in green technologies, and it cost us. And now there is an internal war happening in the Australian Conservative Party over these exact things. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And as always, please remember to click on that like, share, and subscribe button. Until then, we'll see you next time.